If we don't, it'll be positive also, because
No.
In the Netherlands, the word no is simple. It is efficient, it is clear, and most importantly, it saves time. If someone proposes an idea you disagree with, you say no, not to insult them, not to embarrass them, simply because clarity prevents misunderstanding. But the moment you apply the same logic in China, something strange happens. The conversation changes, the room becomes quieter, people look uncomfortable, and suddenly, a simple no feels far heavier than you expected. Because in China, rejecting an idea can easily be interpreted as rejecting the person behind the idea, and that changes how communication works. Instead of saying no directly, many Chinese people communicate refusal in a softer way. You might hear phrases like, "Maybe later," "We will think about it," "That could be difficult." To many Western ears, those phrases sound uncertain. They sound like the conversation is still open. But to most Chinese listeners, the meaning is already obvious. The answer is no. The difference is not honesty. The difference is delivery. Western communication separates the idea from the person. Chinese communication often connects them. So when a Westerner keeps pushing for a clear yes or no, the Chinese side may feel cornered. From the Western perspective, you're simply asking for clarity. From the Chinese perspective, you're forcing someone into a socially uncomfortable position. Because now, they must choose between two bad options. They can reject you directly, or they can damage the atmosphere of the conversation. So instead, the refusal is communicated indirectly, and the expectation is that the listener will understand the signal. When that signal is missed, the interaction becomes awkward for both sides. Now imagine the situation from a Chinese perspective. You've already said no, you communicated it politely, but the other person keeps pushing. They keep asking, "Is it possible? Are you sure? Can we reconsider?" At that point, the Chinese side may start thinking something completely different from what the Westerner expects. Instead of thinking, they just want clarity, they might think, why are they forcing this? Why are they making this uncomfortable for everyone? Because in their mind, the message has already been delivered, just not in a blunt form. And this is where many cultural misunderstandings begin. Western observers often interpret this communication style as vague, or even dishonest. But that interpretation misses the deeper cultural logic. Indirect communication is not about hiding the truth. It's about protecting the emotional structure of the interaction. Because once embarrassment enters a conversation, the damage can last longer than the disagreement itself. This becomes easier to understand if we talk about something many outsiders misunderstand about Chinese culture: emotion. Chinese people are often described as emotionally reserved, quiet, controlled. But that description is misleading. The emotional intensity is not lower, it is simply expressed differently. I sometimes compare Chinese people to Italians. The Italian culture is emotionally expressive. People raise their voices, they use hand gestures, emotion is visible and loud. Chinese culture is almost the opposite in terms of expression. Emotion is internalized. It is controlled, managed between the surface. But that does not mean the emotion is weaker. If anything, it means people become extremely sensitive to emotional signals, tone of voice, choice of words, timing, context. All of these become important because they protect the emotional equilibrium of the interaction. And this emotional sensitivity explains many behaviors that Western observers misinterpret. For example, why criticism is rarely delivered publicly, why disagreements are softened, why refusals are indirect. From the outside, this can look inefficient. From the inside, it preserves dignity. And dignity is not just personal. It extends through networks and relationships. Family, colleagues, social circles. This is why a small moment of embarrassment can carry much larger consequences than Westerners expect. Now, this is a good moment to mention something. If you want to understand where this relational thinking comes from and why protecting relationships often takes priority over solving problems, I explained that in much more detail in part 1 of this series. You can find that video link in the upper right corner now and in the description. It explains the cultural foundation behind many of the behaviors we're discussing here. But now, let's return to the communication itself, because indirect communication is not random, it follows patterns. Once you start recognizing those patterns, conversations in China suddenly become much easier to interpret. For example, phrases like, "that might be difficult," often mean, "this is not going to happen." "We'll think about it," often means, "the answer is no, but we prefer not to say it bluntly." And "maybe later" frequently means, "no, but we want to end the conversation politely." To someone unfamiliar with these signals, it feels confusing. But once you understand the pattern, the communication becomes surprisingly clear. You just have to listen differently. Now here's the interesting part. Many Western analysts misinterpret Chinese statements because they expect Western-style directness, but Chinese communication often relies on implication rather than confrontation, which means that sometimes the message is there, just not in form Western listeners expect. Now I want to end this video with something more personal, because understanding a system does not necessarily mean agreeing with it. And honestly, as someone raised in Dutch communication culture, I struggle with parts of the Chinese communication style. My instinct still prefers clarity, direct answers, fast decisions. When conversations become indirect or delayed, my first reaction is often frustration. I see inefficiency, I see hesitation. And sometimes I think problems could be solved much faster with direct communication. In that sense, I do believe certain aspects of Chinese culture can slow progress. Indirect communication can delay decisions. Strong relational hierarchies can discourage open disagreement. And history shows that systems built heavily around hierarchies sometimes adapt more slowly to rapid change. So yes, I do think China may face challenges because of this cultural dynamics, but that is only one side of the equation, because Western culture also had weaknesses. Directness can damage relationships quickly, extreme individualism can fragment communities, and efficiency sometimes sacrifices long-term stability. So every cultural system carries trade-offs. One emphasizes speed, the other emphasizes stability. One prioritizes clarity, the other prioritizes relational harmony. Neither is universally correct. They simply evolved under different historical conditions. And the most effective individuals are often those who learn to move between both systems. Direct when necessary, diplomatic when possible, firm when required, but aware of emotional consequences. Interestingly, this balance is something Chinese philosophy has discussed for thousands of years. The concept of yin and yang describes opposing forces that exist in balance: hard and soft, direct and indirect, strength and flexibility. In my opinion, the future belongs to people who can understand both sides of that balance, because in an interconnected world, cultural misunderstanding is no longer a small inconvenience. It can influence business decisions, diplomatic relationships, and even geopolitical conflict. If this video gives you a different perspective on how communication works in China, consider subscribing. On this channel, we explore China beyond the headlines through culture, history, and the narratives that shape global perception. And if you want to understand how historical memory influences China's modern behavior, I recommend watching my video China's Revenge from Opium War to Global Superpower. That historical background explains many choices that confuse Western observers today. You can find it on the end screen, in the description, and in the first comment. Because once you begin to understand the cultural logic behind China, many things that once looked confusing start to make a lot more sense. Thank you for watching another episode from Dutch Rebel in China, and see you in my next video.